April 1st, 2006, Columbus, Ohio. Brian Shaffer, a medical student, enters the Ugly Tuna Bar. Camera footage shows him going in at 1:15 a.m., but he never comes out. The bar had only one public entrance, and the service exit led to a construction site that was impossible to navigate without being seen. Brian didn't just walk away. He evaporated in a room full of people. Did he find a blind spot in reality, or is he still somewhere inside those walls?
Today, we're diving into a case that just shouldn't be possible. The vanishing of Brian Shaffer. It starts out like any other night, a guy celebrating the start of spring break, but it ends with a question that feels like it breaks the very laws of physics.
So let's just get right to it. How does a man walk into a bar with only one exit that's being watched by a camera, and then just never walk out again? I mean, really think about that. It's a real-life locked room mystery that has had police completely stumped for almost 20 years. Did he find some kind of glitch in reality, or was the answer hiding in plain sight the entire time?
All right, let's set the scene. We're in Columbus, Ohio. It's April 1st, 2006. A 27-year-old med student named Brian Shaffer is heading out to a place called the Ugly Tuna Saloon to kick off spring break. And this is the last place anyone would ever see him.
Okay, so the layout of this bar is absolutely crucial to understanding why this case is so baffling. See, the Ugly Tuna Saloon was up on the second floor, and the only public way you could get in or out was by taking this one single escalator. And of course, there was a security camera pointed right at the top of it, watching every single person who came and went. So you see what I mean? It's basically a closed box.
Now, this timeline, this is everything. Police combed through the security footage. It's grainy, sure, but it captures the last confirmed moments of his life. At 1:55 in the morning, you can see Brian standing just outside the bar's entrance, chatting with a couple of women. He says his goodbyes, turns around, and walks right back into the bar. And that's it. That is the last time Brian Shaffer was verifiably seen on planet Earth. A few minutes later, the bar closes, his friends are looking for him, but he's just gone.
So, who was this guy? To even begin to guess what happened, you have to know who Brian Shaffer was and what he might have been running from, or maybe running towards.
Well, from the outside, Brian's life looked pretty perfect. He was a 27-year-old med student at Ohio State, so he had this amazing future ahead of him. He was in a serious relationship with another student, Alexis, and they were about to go on vacation to Miami where everyone thought he was going to propose. But, and this is a big but, underneath all of that, he was dealing with something awful. His mother had just died from cancer only 3 weeks before he disappeared. That's a huge weight for anyone to carry.
And this is where things get a little more complicated. His girlfriend Alexis remembered that in the weeks before he vanished, he'd said things like, "Let's just go away, just disappear together." Now, was that just a sweet, romantic thing to say? Or was it something more? Was this a guy who was just cracking under the pressure of med school and the incredible grief of losing his mom? All right, so let's get into the actual investigation. And trust me, this is where the puzzle gets even more confusing, with a lot of dead ends and some pretty strange behavior from some of the people involved.
So the police talked to over 100 people, and pretty quickly, a really weird contrast popped up. Everyone, his girlfriend Alexis, his other friend Meredith, the bar staff, even the women he was talking to on camera, they all cooperated completely. But Clint Florence, the friend he was with that night, totally different story. He gives an initial statement and then lawyers up, refuses a polygraph. Now look, that's what any lawyer would tell you to do, but in a case like this, it definitely raised some eyebrows, and those questions have just been hanging in the air ever since. Okay, so if he didn't go out the front door, the only other possibility police could think of was a service exit. But here's the thing, that exit led straight into a really messy, active construction site. So the theory became, maybe Brian, who'd had a few drinks, tried to find a shortcut out, got hurt, and then what? Got trapped? Or worse, maybe accidentally sealed into a wall when the construction crew came back to work? It's a horrible thought.
But this is where the case just gets so frustrating. The police brought in cadaver dogs. They searched that entire construction site from top to bottom and found absolutely nothing. Not a scent, not a piece of clothing, zero sign that Brian had ever set foot in there. So, the locked room was still locked. No way out. So, right when it feels like every single clue just leads back to him being trapped inside that building, a piece of evidence pops up that just shatters that whole locked room idea. So, what if he wasn't stuck in the building at all? I mean, just think about that for a second. If he wasn't trapped, it means he got out somehow. Which leaves us with two massive questions. How in the world did he get out without being seen? And what happened to him after that?
And here it is, the bombshell. Years later, the lead detective revealed something incredible. Brian's cell phone didn't just die that night. For several days after he vanished, it was pinging cell towers right there in the area. That means the phone was on, and it was outside the building. This just blows the whole trapped inside theory right out of the water. But wait, it gets even weirder. Months go by, and one night his girlfriend Alexis calls his phone, just on a whim. And for the first time, it rings. And it pings a tower in Hilliard, Ohio, a suburb like 14 miles away. What does that even mean?
You know, we can talk about the clues and the theories all day, but we can't forget the absolutely devastating human cost of this mystery. The tragedy didn't stop that night.
This sequence of events is it's brutal. In March of 2006, Brian loses his mom to cancer. Just 3 weeks later, he vanishes. His father, Randy, dedicates his entire life to finding him. And then, in 2008, in a truly bizarre and tragic accident, Randy is killed in his own yard during a storm. A tree branch just fell on him. In the span of about 2.5 years, this family was just completely destroyed. And just when you think it can't get any worse, there's this final cruel twist. After his dad, Randy, died, this message shows up on his online obituary guestbook. For one brief moment, everyone must have thought, this is it, it's a sign. But no, it was traced back to a public computer in Ohio. It was just some heartless person playing a prank. Another painful dead end in a case that's just full of them.
So here we are. After all this time, after all the searching, all the heartbreak, this whole impossible mystery really comes down to two very different but equally compelling possibilities.
We're talking about nearly 20 years now. That's a long, long time. But the one question at the heart of it all hasn't changed one bit since that night in 2006. Where is Brian Shaffer?
So you're left with two main scenarios. Theory one, the perfect escape. A guy just overwhelmed with grief over his mom, the stress of med school, and he uses that night to just walk away, start a new life somewhere else. Then there's theory two, the perfect crime. That he somehow got out of that bar unseen and then met with foul play. And those phone pings, they definitely seem to point to him, or at least his phone, being out and about before something terrible happened.
And that's really where this case stands today. It's the ultimate question. Was Brian Shaffer the victim of a perfectly planned crime, or was he the architect of a flawless disappearance? Did someone else make him vanish, or did he, against all logic, manage to make himself vanish? We saw him go in, but the truth of how or if he ever came out is still a complete and total mystery.
– 2008, Colorado. Joshua Maddux goes for a walk and never returns. 7 years later, developers tearing down an abandoned cabin find a skeleton stuffed inside the chimney. He was naked, his clothes neatly folded inside the cabin. He was jammed into the flue head first, his knees above his head. The owner had placed a heavy steel mesh over the chimney top, meaning Joshua couldn't have climbed in from the outside. Was he forced in from the hearth below? The cabin's silence kept his screams for 7 long years.
All right, let's get into a case that is just completely baffling. We're talking about the truly impossible death of Joshua Maddux. This is a young man who disappeared for 7 long years, only to be found in a place and, in a way, that just doesn't make any sense. So, here's the question at the heart of this whole thing, and I want you to really think about this. How can a person climb down a chimney and then somehow from inside that chimney pull a heavy piece of furniture to block their own exit? It sounds impossible, right? So was this some kind of freak tragic accident? Or was Joshua Maddux literally sealed into a brick tomb by someone else?
Okay, let's dive right in. To understand this, we have to go to the place where this impossible trap was discovered. So picture this. It's August 6th, 2015, in a place called Woodland Park, Colorado. You've got a construction crew demolishing this old, decrepit cabin that's been sitting empty for years. Everything's going normally until they start taking apart the chimney. And that's when everything stops cold. Because wedged inside that chimney, they find a body. It's been mummified, preserved by the dry mountain air, and it's curled up in a fetal position, knees literally pulled up to its face. The body is only wearing a thermal shirt. But here's the part that just breaks your brain. A huge, heavy piece of furniture is blocking the fireplace from the inside of the cabin. Let that sink in. The exit was blocked from the inside. It doesn't take long for dental records to tell them who it is. And the truth is just devastating. The body belongs to Joshua Vernon Maddux, an 18-year-old kid who had been missing for 7 years. So, who was Joshua? And how did he end up here, after 7 years of his family wondering where he was? Well, Joshua's life, sadly, had already been touched by tragedy. Back in 2006, his older brother, Zachary, had died by suicide, which must have been just devastating for the family. Then, 2 years later, on March 8th, 2008, Joshua, now 18, tells his dad he's going for a walk, and he just vanishes. He never comes home. His family waits, hoping he'll return, but after 5 days, his father reports him missing. And for 7 years, nothing. The absolute worst part of this whole thing? That cabin, it was just 2 blocks away from his family's home. 2 blocks. You know, by all accounts, Joshua was this really creative, free-spirited kid. He loved music, he loved nature, he loved to write. And because of that, his family always held on to this little sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd run off to chase a dream. You know, start a band, see the world. But the reality was so much darker, and it was hidden just around the corner the entire time. All right, so this is where the case just completely splits in 2. You have the official story, and then you have the evidence. And honestly, they could not be more different. So the coroner's official ruling, accidental death. They basically said, okay, Joshua tried to climb into the cabin through the chimney, he got stuck, and he died from exposure. They found no drugs in his system, no signs of major trauma on the body. So, case closed. But the guy who owned the cabin, a man named Chuck Murphy, he took one look at that scene and said, no way. This was not an accident. This was foul play. And listen to his reasons because they are incredibly compelling. First off, he says he had installed a heavy steel mesh over the top of the chimney specifically to keep raccoons and birds out. When Joshua's body was found, that heavy mesh was gone. Second, we have that breakfast bar. Again, how could Joshua possibly have moved that heavy thing to block the fireplace if he was already stuck inside the chimney? It just doesn't work. And third, and this one is just so weird, the rest of Joshua's clothes, his shoes, his socks, everything were found inside the cabin, sitting in a neat pile right next to the fireplace. I mean, let's just stop and think about that for a second. If his clothes are neatly folded inside the cabin, doesn't that mean he had to have been inside the cabin first? The whole trying to break in theory just falls apart. It would mean he got inside, took off most of his clothes, and then for some reason decided to climb up into the chimney from the fireplace. Why would anyone do that? It makes 0 sense. So, with all this physical evidence screaming foul play, you have to ask the next logical question. If this wasn't an accident, who did it? Well, that's when a very interesting name pops up. A guy known as Andy. Yeah, so after the discovery of Joshua's body, the story got a lot of attention online. And a tip came in, actually on Reddit, from someone who knew them back in high school. This person said they remembered this guy, Andy, hanging out with Josh a lot right before he disappeared. And Andy had been telling people something interesting. Oh yeah, me and Josh were hanging out, we're gonna go to New Mexico. So who is this Andy? His full name is Andrew Richard Newman. He was, in fact, an acquaintance of Joshua's. And sure enough, records show he did leave for New Mexico a while after Joshua went missing. The thing is, he went alone. And when investigators looked into Andrew Newman's background, well, they found he had a very, very extensive criminal record. And we're not talking about small stuff here. His record is just littered with serious, violent crimes across multiple states. We're talking assault on an officer in Colorado, robbery, public disorder. He was even implicated in a horrific assault in New Mexico. The guy was arrested in Texas and had charges in at least 6 different states. This was a seriously dangerous person. And here is the most frustrating part of this entire story. Even with all these suspicions, even with his violent history and his known connection to Joshua right before he vanished, police never officially pursued Andrew Newman as a suspect. They stuck to their original ruling. The case was closed. It was just an accident. So, that's where we're left, with a case that's officially closed, but feels wide open. We have a string of contradictions, physical evidence that just doesn't add up, and an official story that feels, well, impossible. 7. That's the number that haunts this case. For 7 years, Joshua's body was in that chimney. For 7 years, his family had no answers, no closure, all while he was just a stone's throw from their front door, trapped. So the police have their story. It was a tragic, bizarre accident, and they closed the case. That's the official record. But what do you think happened in that chimney in Colorado? Do you buy the official story of a 1 in a million freak accident? Or do all the impossible details point to something far more sinister? A perfect murder? The secret is still sealed in that chimney. I'd love to hear your theory.
January 15th, 1947, Los Angeles. The body of Elizabeth Short was found in a vacant lot. She hadn't just been murdered. She had been surgically bisected at the waist and drained of blood. Her mouth was carved into a haunting Glasgow smile. The killer mocked the police with letters and personal belongings sent by mail. Despite 150 suspects, the case remains the ultimate symbol of Hollywood's dark side. Elizabeth wanted to be famous. In the end, she became immortal through a tragedy that no one can explain.
All right, let's get right into it. For well over 75 years, one particular case has just haunted the city of Los Angeles. It's a story packed with brutal murder, a media frenzy like you wouldn't believe, and a trail of clues that just went stone cold. It left behind one of America's most infamous and most chilling unsolved mysteries. Today, we're going to dissect the anatomy of the Black Dahlia case.
And this, right here, is the question at the absolute heart of it all. It's what's puzzled investigators from day one. You see, the crime scene wasn't just violent, it was theatrical. It was a performance. And to even begin to understand the why, we have to go back to that morning, back to where it all started. So let's set the scene. It's a crisp winter morning in a pretty quiet LA neighborhood, but a discovery is about to be made that will shock the city and honestly the entire country to its very core. Can you just imagine this for a second? A woman named Betty Berzinger is out for a walk with her 3-year-old daughter. She sees something pale and kind of broken looking in the grass. She gets closer, probably just thinking it's a busted department store mannequin. But then the horror sinks in. It's not plastic. It's a person. She grabs her daughter, rushes to a nearby house to call the police, and in that moment, kicks off an investigation that, believe it or not, is still talked about today.
Okay, this is where the case goes from simply brutal to deeply, deeply baffling. The precision here is what's so chilling. This wasn't a messy, frenzied attack, no way. The body was literally bisected with what coroners described as surgical skill. It's a procedure known as a hemicorporectomy, which means severing the body right between the lumbar vertebrae. This is not something your average person knows how to do. On top of that, the body had been drained of all its blood, washed clean, and then posed. This wasn't just a murder, it felt more like a dissection. It screamed that the killer had some kind of advanced medical knowledge.
And then, there was the face. As if all of that wasn't horrific enough, the killer had carved this grotesque, permanent smile onto her face. It became the most infamous, most haunting image of the entire case. It was an act of such personal, profound cruelty.
You know, this type of wound actually has a name. It's called a Glasgow smile. It's a signature of extreme violence, and it's designed to permanently disfigure. The fact that the killer did this, it suggests a deep-seated rage, right? A desire not just to kill, but to completely erase who the victim was and replace it with this horrifying mask. So behind all the gruesome headlines and that infamous nickname, the Black Dahlia, there was a real person, a 22-year-old woman with her own dreams and a pretty complicated past. So who was the real Elizabeth Short? Elizabeth's life, well, it was marked by a lot of instability. She grew up back in Massachusetts, then came out to California hoping to connect with her father, but that fell apart pretty fast. She sort of drifted between cities, had a minor run-in with the law, and then, so tragically, lost her fiancé in a plane crash right at the end of World War II. Those last 6 months of her life were spent in and around LA, just trying to find her place.
From the second that body was found, the LAPD was thrown into this whirlwind of an investigation, and it was made 1,000 times more complicated, almost immediately, by an unbelievable media circus.
This part of the story is it's brutal. Get this. Reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner called Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe, back on the East Coast. But they didn't tell her what happened. No, They pretended her daughter had won a beauty contest. They pumped her for quotes, for family stories, for every personal detail they could squeeze out of her, and only then did they drop the bomb that her daughter had been horrifically murdered. They created a media sensation at the expense of a grieving family. It's just awful.
And then, just when you think this case can't get any crazier, the killer's sheer arrogance comes into play. About a week after the murder, someone claiming to be the killer calls up a newspaper editor. He wasn't confessing, he was actually complaining that his masterpiece wasn't getting enough front-page news, and then he promised to send proof, openly challenging the entire American legal system. The nerve.
And he made good on his promise. A package showed up, and inside were Elizabeth's personal belongings. Her birth certificate, some photos, an address book. Every single item was a potential clue, but it was also a calculated move to confuse and mislead the police. That address book, for example, belonged to a guy named Mark Hansen. He immediately became a prime suspect, but just like so many leads in this case, it ultimately went absolutely nowhere.
So you can imagine what happened next. The killer's taunts and the media frenzy created this perfect storm of false leads, fake confessions, and a list of potential suspects that just became impossibly long.
I want you to just try and wrap your head around this number for a second. Over 60 people confessed to this murder. 60! Now, most of them were just publicity hounds or were clearly unwell, but can you imagine being an investigator trying to find a single shred of truth in all of that noise?
So after weeding out all the obvious fakes, the DA's office was still left with a list of 25 people. 25 individuals who were considered genuine, viable persons of interest. This wasn't a case with one or two strong leads. It was this sprawling, tangled web with dozens of potential culprits.
Now that suspect list was massive, but a few names really stand out, especially when you remember that evidence of surgical skill. One of the most compelling suspects, who many people today believe was the killer, was a man named Dr. George Hodel. He was a brilliant doctor, but he had a really dark side, known for this wild, decadent lifestyle. Decades later, his own son, who was a former LAPD homicide detective, built this incredibly powerful case against him. He didn't just link his father to the Black Dahlia murder, but potentially to others as well. The idea of a respected doctor living this double life as a sadistic killer, well, it has become one of the most central theories in this whole case. So here we are. Decades have passed, all the witnesses have died, key evidence has been lost to time, but the case itself, it's only grown in infamy. It's become a legend, blurring that line between solid fact and wild fiction.
So let's just clear the air on a few things because it's important. The press painted Elizabeth as this promiscuous wannabe starlet. They're the ones who likely came up with the Black Dahlia nickname inspired by a movie at the time. They spread rumors that she was a prostitute, which the police could never, ever prove. Another one of these persistent myths was that she had some kind of birth defect that made her unable to have sex. Totally false. The autopsy and witness interviews confirmed it. The legend has really, truly overshadowed the victim.
And so, we're left with this haunting final question. Elizabeth Short died in unimaginable agony, only to become an immortal Hollywood legend. Did her killer take their secret to the grave? Or could the truth still be out there, maybe even present in the bloodline of a powerful family? Was the death of the Black Dahlia a tragic, frustrating cold case, or was it in fact the perfect crime?
Cinematic close-up, 16:9. A vintage reel of film spinning on a projector, but the film strip is blank and white. The light from the projector casts a flickering shadow of a person on a brick wall. Gritty 35mm film grain, moody lighting, professional and haunting finish. No text.